There's an awareness of how much society and environment has shaped one's point of view, one's worldview, beliefs, and values. The mind is seen as completely contingent on historical context, geographic place, economic circumstance, education, the structure of society, culture, media, advertising, and language. This is huge when you realize this. See, to most people, most conformist people, their mind simply cannot compute the simple fact that the only reason you're a Christian is because you were born in a Christian country to Christian parents. That's it. That's the only reason you're a Christian. If you were born in a Muslim country to a Muslim family, Muslim parents, you would be a Muslim. This does not compute to a fundamentalist religious person. And likewise, actually, there's an even deeper level to this problem, where for most atheists and scientific materialists, it does not compute that the only reason you're an atheist, scientific materialist, or a rationalist is because you were born in a developed country in the 21st century or the 20th century, maybe, at a certain era in history where materialism and science and rationality are taken as absolute truths, and you've adopted those through the education system and so forth. This does not compute in the minds of most scientists. They can't see past this. They think that actually the science and the materialism and the rationalism, that this is the one true way relative to all the other religious mumbo jumbo that's found in the history books that came before. But they can't see that, yes, science is more advanced and more correct, so to speak, than all the stuff that came before, but then there's new levels to science. There's things beyond science which science cannot comprehend because of the very nature and limits that science imposes on its own self. By being science, science blocks itself off from certain aspects of reality. But most scientists can't fathom this because they're just at the conventional level. There's also an appreciation of how media, advertising, culture, all of this influences us. There's an understanding now of also how much language plays a role. Before, language was taken completely for granted. Now, language is seen to actually structure our thoughts. We can only think the things that our language allows us to think. The distinctions that our language makes are the distinctions that then our mind categorizes reality in, projecting those distinctions and then sort of creating a feedback loop where we are using confirmation bias to then see our own projections and then to convince ourselves that that is what reality is actually like, when it's just relative, it's a perspective. You start to question the education system now. You start to see that there's no such thing as some objective, perfect education system. Every education system has certain biases and limitations in it, whether it's a religious or a secular education. And the structure of society now starts to be questioned, where before stuff like capitalism, for example, in America especially, we just take capitalism for granted as just the natural way that governments work, the way that economies work. But is it really so natural? You start to see how artificial it is. You start to see how it's manipulated and changed and socially constructed. There's nothing natural per se about capitalism, at least not in the way that it's actually done in developed countries. So you start to question that. Whereas someone who's a conformist doesn't question capitalism. They just believe that capitalism is right. And then again, if you grew up in communist China or in Soviet Russia, you would think that communism or socialism is superior and the right way to do it. And you really believe it's the right way. The funny thing is that these people on like Fox News, these conservative types who rail against socialism and Marxism and communism, that these very same people, the structure of their mind is such that if they just were born, rather than being born in America, if they were just born in Soviet Russia 50 years ago, they would be staunch Communist Party members, vehemently fighting for communism against capitalism. Because again, like I said in part one, it's not the content that's so important, it's the structure of the mind. Yes, a capitalist, like a dogmatic capitalist and a dogmatic communist, it might seem like these are polar opposites, but actually, if you're looking at it from a higher elevation, you see that they're very similar to each other. Just their ideas are different. The content of their mind is different, but the structure of their mind is the same. They're both dogmatic in the same way. They're both failing to see the pros and cons and trade-offs of the other system. They're both stuck within their little narrow paradigm, and they're both busy defending it without being aware of what they're doing. They're both unable to step up to a higher elevation, look downwards, and to see how maybe the two could be reconciled as a sort of a yin and yang thing. So at the pluralist stage, there's a realization that the mind has far less control over being molded than you previously believed. At the conventional stages, yes, you thought there was brainwashing, but you didn't consider yourself to be brainwashed. Now, at the post-conventional stages, you realize, holy shit. Not only is there brainwashing, but I'm the biggest fool because I fooled myself into thinking that there was no such thing as brainwashing, and that itself was the brainwashing. The brainwashing was that I am the only one who wasn't brainwashed, which of course means I was the most brainwashed.